It's an amazing looking festival, and it's so focused on pilots. This is like the new Sundance for television. It has that feel.
It's a really great idea to do a festival for serialized material. I think it's cool. It's kind of ahead of its time.
They seem to be really tapping into a broad spectrum of both new and emerging talent and also more established talent.
We're really excited because we didn't realize that we were part of this wave of independent television. Our next favorite TV shows are going to be independently produced.
It's so exciting to be at SeriesFest with this project because television is where all the big risks are being taken, where the most exciting work is happening. And this is a festival that celebrates that.
I cannot wait to rewatch that whole series now. That on the big screen, that was incredible. Okay, I'm stunned. First up, we've got our moderator for today's panel, Mr. Steve Green, Associate TV Editor at IndieWire, who's going to lead us through this conversation.
Hello. Thank you all for coming out on a Tuesday afternoon. I have the immense pleasure of bringing up two people who are instrumental in making some of these scenes happen. So please welcome Music Supervisor Jen Malone and Production Designer Brian Kane. All right.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. I feel like there are a number of different ways to sort of get into talking about the show. But I guess on in sort of an overall level to start out with, because you are dealing with a show that happens in two places at once and two times at once, do you kind of have to approach it as two different shows, or how much do you try and sort of keep them connected and keep them the same thing?
It's definitely a cohesive show. The majority of the music is period specific, 96 or before. We only have, I think, maybe 3 songs, that are contemporary songs. But it's definitely a whole, we look at it as a whole show and not, we don't really separate it out too much.
And how about for your end, Brian?
Somewhat similar. Definitely, even in the contemporary storyline, we were always paying homage to 96 and previous. The characters' early story arcs and the forest follow them definitely into the current day.
That first episode, obviously there's the cold open where you sort of see what's happening out in the wilderness, but I think the reason why the season overall is so effective is because you spend so much of that first episode in sort of the before, and you get to see what their lives were like before this all happened. So as you're working on trying to sort of build this world and understand who these characters are, what were some of the things that you really were keeping in mind of what can we establish in this first episode that then people can sort of latch onto and keep onto for the rest of the season?
I think for the music, it was very much establishing like a character's playlist. So whether it was Shauna listening to the Liz Phair or with Natalie having, the PJ Harvey song. So definitely kind of help defining the characters through different songs that we use, but at the same time having something like Shoop, where they all came together as a team and kind of use that also with the Never Tear Us Apart over the big ending montage.
And I feel like this is something with a lot of the shows that you work on where you don't want to outsmart your characters. You don't want to try and make them too cool or not. In the case of Natalie, like you don't want to undersell the fact that she would be listening to stuff that's a little sort of outside, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people will ask, like, do I do character playlists? And I keep that in mind when looking for songs, but at the same time, the music can function in a different way. So I don't like to kind of box them in too much because you never know, again, how the song is functioning in the narrative, where that character is actually at in the storyline. So there's kind of overviews, and then we have a lot of fun, like using the musicals for Misty, which was
I was going to ask about that.
oh my God, it was so fun and funny, and it was so fun to pitch for, because I do know that world very well.
And for Brian, I feel like in that first episode, you learned so much by seeing all the bedrooms, and we see a little of that for Misty here in that clip. How do you sort of go about doing that without, while trying to sort of establish them as individual characters, but not making it so that there's not at least some overlap, I guess, and some common ground?
We had to think long game, for sure. There was the individual story of that episode, but there was also trying to think about who the characters are going to be developing into over time. Misty's a perfect example of somebody where we see her bedroom in 91. We had so much fun with that because Misty's father, I love to write backstories myself, kind of thing, when we don't get them from the show's creators. So like Misty's father was a doctor, and she used to take 5-year out-of-date design magazines out of the waiting room, and that's how she decorated her bedroom, that kind of thing. And that pays a lot of homage to all of these characters. Jackie, who's the Disney princess character. Shauna, who's a girl who's coming of age, and Natalie, who is a broken character. Yeah.
And you bring up an interesting point about sort of what you are given as information, what you sort of bring to yourself with yourself. For the two of you, I guess, to step back a little bit, at the beginning of this process, what are the things that either on a script level or when you're having conversations with people like Ashley and Bart, what are the things that you try and latch onto that then you can sort of take and to inform what you're doing the rest of the season?
Ashley and Bart definitely script in a couple things throughout the episode, but they're from Jersey. I'm from Jersey. We both grew up at the same time period, so we related on a lot of levels, especially with Ashley's music taste and mine and what we were listening to growing up. So it was very fun that way to kind of relate on a level that for whatever reason with my other shows, whether my show creator is a man or whether it's, back in the 70s, that I don't get to, really connect with on that level.
And for Brian, the conversations that you have from sort of the project in its infancy, I guess, is it at the beginning? Is it a lot of logistical talk, or is it more sort of big picture? Here's what we're kind of looking for, and sort of leaving it to you to then sort of jump on the specifics, I guess.
Ashley and Bart, they're very thoughtful in the writing process, for sure. And Jonathan, who the network brought in, to work with them. We came to the table quite late. We only had about 6 weeks prep on the show, and so logistics were definitely a theme. But at the same time, they were very thoughtful about what they wanted to convey and who their characters were. We always had to keep that in mind as we were putting together the infrastructure.
Yeah. And infrastructure is a perfect way to describe the clip we saw of the crash and the aftermath. Obviously, with a scene like that, you kind of wanted to work on two levels, to work as a tableau, as something that people can take in and sort of see details. But then the realities of production, you need to sort of create room for cameras to go through, and with that scene, it seemed like there was a lot of timing involved too. So. Sort of juggling all of those aspects for a scene like that. Where do you sort of start with that?
That was one of our most complicated scenes, and it's definitely a choreography. I mean, the good news is it was episode 1, so we had the full 6 weeks to play with it. But we were working 24/7 to be able to build, Thais's brownstone, Shauna's rancher, and Misty's place while we were building this 727 narrow body. We went through a couple different processes. I actually found an airplane for sale, and then it turned out we couldn't get it cut up and shipped to Vancouver fast enough. So I had an amazing construction team, and we built it into 10-foot chunks that could be brought in truck, and we had to bring it into. We were shooting in a closed down airsoft field that we turned into the forest.
Okay.
And then it was the choreography. The director of that episode, Jamie Travis, had an incredible vision. We would get together for hours every day with the cinematographer and the stunt coordinator and work out the choreography. So, like you said, we made sure that we had, sections of floor that could be removed, so the cameraman could be in the floor shooting up, and it was quite a challenge, but it was very rewarding. I haven't seen it on the big screen, so just watching it right now was great.
Yeah. No. That's
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
And in rewatching the first episode, it's interesting that when you see the crash from Shauna's perspective, I feel like sometimes when you see plane crashes in fictional stories, you've got luggage flying out from the top, and wings are falling off, and windows are blasting. When you're sort of working on a scene like that, do you sort of have to plan for a wide range of options of could we do this that has a lot more going on, or in case that dial wants to be turned in whatever way?
There's certainly artistic license, but I mean, as a rule, and the reason that I really meshed with Ashley and Bart was that my style of design is realism. So I started by calling the FAA and getting everything I could find out on, what happens during that type of crash. Right up to the bodies up in the trees, which you see in episode 2 or 3. A lot of the bodies, depending on when the plane broke up, would be naked by the time they hit the ground, because the clothes would be pulled off by the wind, and so try to keep it as real as possible.
You brought up the bodies in the trees. There are a couple sequences over the course of the season where you actually have a physical body that is an integral part of the sort of the scene itself. How does that sort of change what you do when you actually have someone who is physically part of the surroundings rather than just sort of moving through it?
Again, that was a choreography and a culmination. That particular tree, we found the tree in the forest that we loved, and then we went back to the shop and we sculpted it out of steel and foam, and built the top 30 feet of it so that it could have an armature that breaks on command, can be reset, parts of branches that could be sticking through our character, and then we meshed the two of them together in VFX.
That's phenomenal. And it seems like when you're doing something in nature that there's an opportunity to sort of find those meshings where you can utilize what's already there and then sort of build on what you need to sort of do what you need to do.
Yeah, and it's a show that we consciously chose to keep as real as possible. Also, in terms of effects, we try to use we tried to go analog as much as possible. So there were some digital extensions, the tail of the plane. So we built, the actual plane is 160 feet long, and we built 122 feet of it. So it's only the last 40 feet that became digital. We created that forest. We had to build a road through to get it, and then make it look real, and then destroy it. So it's quite a process.
As far as sort of the music goes, Craig and Anna, an incredible score here. How much of that are you getting beforehand to sort of know what the work they're doing so that when you're bringing in songs that they can feel of a piece, I guess?
So how it works is that we have spotting sessions. So as the editors are putting together the episodes, they'll put in temp or they'll reach out to us to say, okay, we need a song for a scene here. They'll kind of send us like a rough edit. And we'll submit a couple options, and then our Ashley Bart and the director, they'll pick which one they feel works the best, or we have to send more. And then we'll go through an episode with everybody and kind of go through all of the music points and discuss, what Craig and Anna kind of need to do, what the music's function is there, whether or not we're keeping the song, how we're going to edit the song. And so that's kind of how we go through with every episode for all TV and film, working with composers, is pretty much, just figuring out where the music is going to go and, again, how it's going to function to the narrative.
And as you're clearing some of these songs, a part of it is having a conversation about how it's going to be used. But I'm curious, in those conversations, how much are you talking about the sort of the scenes surrounding it and sort of the overall show, so that people, when you're trying to get this permission, they understand not just the scene that it's involved in, but the entire project overall?
So how it works is a song has two parts. It has the master recording, and then it has the composition, the music and the lyrics. And sometimes a lot of the times those are owned by two different entities, usually the record label. And then on a song level, if there's several different songwriters, they might, the song will be split up into percentages. So you and I write a song, it's 50-50, but you're with one publisher, I'm with another. So as the music supervisor, we have to go to you for your permission, and then me for my permission, and you always have to have 100%. When we do that, you have what's called a quote request that does have, an overall series description, and then how we're going to use the song, what the scene is, how long we're going to use it for, and then the unsexy part of how much it's going to cost. So we definitely give the songwriters and the master owners, a accurate-ish scene description. Sometimes, it's very nuanced, and you have to, on some of my other shows that have a lot more graphic content, you have, that's a little bit different. And then the copyright holders decide if that's how if they're on board of using the music in the show and in the scene, and, hopefully get their approval.
Because it seems like sometimes it can come down to that it might be easier to get a song if more of it is played or less of it is played.
No, that only affects the price.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess sort of talking about, you mentioned the In Excess cover. You having a modern interpretation of a song that would have existed in the pre-times that we see for the younger versions of the characters. It seems like that's effective when you use it sort of once or twice. But I imagine that's something you didn't want to overuse too much, and not to to use the actual versions of a lot of these songs, I guess.
Yeah, I think that was the only cover that we used, and that was very tricky with both parties, with Paloma Faith and with In Excess. But we ended up getting it done because that's, it's important that, for filmmakers, that you can have the most perfect song in the entire world. But if you can't clear it and you can't afford it, you cannot use it. So that was tricky, getting everybody on board, because there were two different rights holders. Normally In Excess, they own everything. They control the master recording and the composition. But that one was just a really fun, but it was a difficult scene to find the right song. And we definitely pitched a lot of options, but this one just worked so perfectly. And then we were able to, finally, after a long time, get the approval in, and clearly it works so well on so many different levels.
Because there is something about hearing a cover where you kind of sense like this is kind of familiar. I don't know exactly what this is, and if you're not familiar with it, then when the lyrics kick in or when the chorus kicks in, then you register it.
And also having the female voice. I mean, the storyline being mostly about high school, not mostly, but being about high school girls and women. We really kind of leaned into that quite a bit in having a lot of female artists, and so that really worked and spoke to the narrative and the overall show itself about girls coming of age. It's part horror story, it's part coming of age.
Brian, you were mentioning the houses and the interiors you were building as you were sort of building that giant plane crash. I think that it's so important to see the sort of the variation of where these characters have ended up, and to not have all of their houses feel like the same, that they've ended up in the same place. So how did you sort of talk about finding those degrees of differences and what would sort of be the through line for each of them?
Again, it was trying to get into who the characters were, following their story arcs. Taissa, who's now, running for senator, left the past behind, is completely unaffected by the forest. She's working on bettering the neighborhood. So, we decided to put her in what is a somewhat middle-class brownstone New York neighborhood, but we really upscaled the place because that follows her character. Shauna, there's again backstory. There's this idea that they all got money from the crash, all the survivors. So the idea was that that sent Taissa to law school, bought Shauna her first house, which never changed after that. Because Jeff is such a horrible businessman. Misty bought her little post-war bungalow, and again, decorated it out of old design magazines. And Natalie, who is got no anchor. But despite all that, is probably the strongest of the characters. The through line through it all, though, is that the one character that is never really talked about is the forest. Which was both their captor and their savior, kept them alive for 19 months in the forest. So we try to subliminally dot the forest into each of these characters, whether it was, with Shauna, it was the custom wallpaper mural that I put in her dining room. For Shauna, it was, the artwork, and all the greens outside the windows, very specific choice of color palette and patterns for the motel room. Even though it was a transient place, it still had to feel as though she was always subtly influenced by the forest.
And with the forest comes animals. I imagine those are an entirely separate set of challenges when you're having scenes where you have to sort of recreate and involve that somehow.
Yeah, for sure. Although oddly enough, the most challenging aspect animal-wise for us was the wolves in the city, right? Which was all part of Taissa's mental breakdown, or not. We don't know. And Bart the bear, who we met in the final episode, who so graciously gave his life so the girls could have food. And working with those animals was interesting. Yeah.
We would love to have some audience questions, so be thinking about what you might want to ask. But before we do that, and this was something we were talking about before the panel, now that we've had a chance to talk a little bit about the work you did on this particular show, I'm curious if, for either of you, there are any sort of persistent misconceptions about what your job is and what you do on a day-to-day basis, or sort of elements of your job that people may not fully understand.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, the very unsexy but necessary part of music supervision is clearance. Because again, If you can't clear it, you can't use it. And so, my job is not sitting around all day listening to music, which a lot of people think it is. And no, it is not. A lot of people on Twitter think it is and think they can do it. I'm like, oh yeah? Good luck clearing that song with 15 writers and 20 publishers, and you end up getting 99.9%, and you need to find that 1% that somebody in jail might own. I mean, the stories I have for clearance are ridiculous, and finding people could always be tough, and not everybody approves. For this show specifically, for the finale, everybody was so stoked on Enya. And we sent out the quote request, but we got a denial. And that was really a bum out. And so, but I told Ashley and Bart, write a letter to Miss Enya. And it was a beautiful letter, and we sent it. And we didn't hear from them for a while until like 2 days before, we had to get a backup. 2 days before we were going to mix the episode, Enya changed her mind. She wants to approve. And it was interesting because I wasn't sure, because I did, I offered a little bit more money because I had some saved up from some of the earlier episodes. Or if it was, again, this was the finale and the show had started airing. And I think what's been amazing about this show and some other shows that I work on is that the episodes are dropped weekly. So it really had a chance to build up this buzz. And so I wonder if that was maybe one of the reasons why she was like, oh, actually, okay, you can use it. So I think one of the most common misconceptions is that, I sit around and listen to music. We have to deal with budgets. We start at the script stage. So, for example, Shoop and Kiss from a Rose was scripted in. They were scripted for the characters to sing on camera, and we had to clear those before we shot it. So we're working with production. We start at the script stage as well. Music supervisors are pretty much the only department that are on from day one until the last episode of the last mix is delivered. So we're on for these shows for a really long time. So we're watching, the shoot dates, when is this going to shoot, and just really staying on top of scripts. So our job is really vast. I mean, it's not just picking out cool songs.
Yeah, it's not just going, what music theater songs are gonna be good for Misty.
Yeah, I mean, it's for The Offspring, we pitched, I think, about 50 different songs for that spot. And, we landed on that one just because it just connected. I mean, at the end of the day, the people that make the decisions are the showrunners. My job is to serve their vision. Luckily, with this show, because a lot of it was music that I'd listened to, and I was like, yes, Portishead, Jane's Addiction. People that know
Mazzy
me.
Star.
Yeah, people that know me know that my fingers were all over this show. So yeah, just being able to be nimble with the and then being with the deadlines. I mean, it's a pretty intense job, and when you have a show like this or some of my other shows, to manage all of that music in 10 episodes it's pretty intense.
And for you, Brian, is there a particular thing that you either hear that people may not?
I just sit around listening to music myself.
I can do your job.
Yeah.
I can decorate a
Easy,
house,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's from the same thing. I mean, the process from reading the script, as a production designer, I like to think of myself as a world builder, because we're not walking into locations and just decorating them and shooting them. We're trying to create a world that is believable, trying to always pay respect to the showrunners, creators, the director, the cinematographer, keeping the dialogue open at all times. But then we do have the logistics involved. I've described just a few scenes. there is not, there's a misconception in terms of Hollywood budgets. As you can attest
Yes.
to.
Oh, yeah.
They're finite. And we want to make sure that everything we do gets 100%. So for me, it's also about being as thoughtful as possible to make sure that I'm not spending money where it's not needed. Not spending money on things that aren't going to be seen on camera. Whether I'm working on a television series or on a feature film, what my frame and my perspective is going to be is different. I pay attention to that in television. And I thought that we did a great job with Yellowjackets.
I agree. And I think we have a few people in the audience who might agree. So yeah, let's start from this side here. Yes, in that.
Love the show, and my name is Rhea. I'm a writer-director. And I guess a separate question for both, because it's different worlds and what you both do. But in terms of the forest, I mean, like some of the stuff that they showed with the, with the close-up of Christina Ricci's character, with the mask and everything, like the snow, and just the way that world that they kind of built in this forest was so interesting. And I thought what you said about building trees just blew my mind. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about like the exterior building and like, was it really snowing? Were you guys building snow? There's so many different seasons, like literal weather seasons in the show. So just curious how you tackled that from your standpoint. And then in terms of music, I'm like always really curious with how budgets are built and like whether with a show like this, knowing that it is music heavy, what kind of conversations you're having with the creators and just the show in general in terms of getting what's needed. I've always been really curious how budgets like that are set from, up front or not. So just curious how to navigate getting the music that you want, but also figuring out how to balance that dance with budget and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started with the pilot, and we knew that music was going to be a character in the show, and music is so important to our producers and our showrunners. So we were, Showtime was very supportive to let us do what we needed to do creatively. But the network sets the budget, and I've worked on shows where we just have nothing to work with, and then I've worked on shows, again, like Yellowjackets, where the network is very supportive of it. But it's my job to manage the budget. Episode 1, we all know, had a lot of music in it. But I think it was episode 7, we just had the one song, the Collective Soul song. So, so we were able to amortize the budget and figure out, like, okay, well, we're going to, in my opinion, you always want to spend your money on 1 and 2, because 1, that's what everybody's going to watch, and if they like it, then they're going to watch 2, and then they're still in, they're hooked. And then obviously the finale, we want to go out with a bang. So that's kind of originally, at the beginning, how I map my budget, and then just kind of fill in, but always, it's a constant dance with, with working with people, labels and publishers, on if they're being fair, on giving us a fee, or if they're just, taking advantage. So that's pretty much how the budgets work.
Check. Hi. Oh, I didn't do the pilot. The pilot was shot in LA. I know that, and then we reshot about 60% of the pilot when it moved to Vancouver, because there was some recasting that was done. There were a lot of scenes that didn't necessarily work from the pilot. I know that the wider scenes in the pilot with snow were shot in Mammoth in the snow, and everything tighter was false snow. We did snow in episode 10, and I know that the big conversation was that the entire second season, the 90s storyline will take place in the snow. So the first season final episode was the first day of snow. So that's definitely going to be a factor. I know that
No spoilers.
Right. Because they're there for 19 months. And it is a bit of a logistical nightmare. In terms of the forest, like I said, it was a airsoft field, and it was a whole forest. I mean, it was acres and acres and acres. We built the cabin in it. There was talk, in production, especially when you have some kids who are younger. We got lucky in that almost all of our cast was over 18, so we didn't have to restrict our hours. But we talked long and hard about turning one of our 3 stages into a forest and building the cabin in the forest so that we can control the forest and control the snow and control the light. In the end, we built the attic on stage, but that was it for out, and of course the tree that the coach lands in. But yeah, we were changing it up constantly. We had an army of about 30 greensmen who were constantly changing around trees and replenishing trees, because a tree is not just a tree, which again we hear from a lot, usually from music supervisors. And then we had the fake snow, and of course, if anybody has ever tried to walk in the snow or on the beach without leaving any footprints, they know what that's like. Mm-hmm. So it's a tedious process for sure.
Yeah. Let's go in the middle here. Yeah.
Jen, you mentioned the difference between episode 1 and 7 as far as songs versus composition. Do you find that there's a more emotional connection with the audience when it's score versus a song, or do you think that depending on the story that's being told and the generation that's watching it, there'll be more of a connection for an actual song with lyrics?
You tell me.
You're the professional.
Well, no, but you're the audience. You're the one that's,
Sorry, continue.
I mean, I think, we're all serving the narrative. We're all serving the story. But, I think that I think to your question, it's really about, your experience with the show. When I'm watching cuts as they come out, I'm not watching it as a viewer. I'm making sure the timings are correct for the song, making sure, the scenes are correct, because if there's anything, sex or drugs or violence, we have to be very specific. So, so I'm not watching it as an audience member. I watch it when it airs live. So I think, it just really depends. I mean, there was points in the show where we tried a song and we're like, you know what, score would be better here. So it's just kind of as we're going through, but, as far as how, I think to the beginning of your question, it's more like, well, how do you feel when you watched it?
I guess I'm asking if you have the same emotional connection as a composer when you're implementing a song. Obviously, the score that's being implemented over the narrative has like the intention of gripping the audience and taking them further down that journey. So I'm curious if you have kind of the same connection.
I think so. I mean, I think that's the exact same function as a song, is to to connect with the audience and to help tell the story.
Great.
I think, do we have? Let's go here. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, in terms of independent filmmaking, like oftentimes when you're working with such small budgets, I'm just wondering how you both, if you have any recommendations for how to go about optimizing those kind of like creative decisions when you're working on like smaller scales.
I think for music, using independent artists. I think that is something that can, they're available to you. Just using, there's, whether it's, SoundCloud or Bandcamp, just really using independent artists where they will be hopefully more willing to do something where it's like $100. So I think that that's a good way. There's also, I mean, this is kind of getting into the nitty gritty, but when, you have to clear the music, and if you do want bigger songs, you have to be prepared to pay for them or limit the rights. So, instead of like for our show, we clear for all media, excluding theatrical, worldwide, in perpetuity. But for an independent film, perhaps you can just limit it to festivals only, but and be able to get it for a much smaller fee. But I think it's important for the independent filmmakers to take it upon yourselves to learn about music clearance. For everybody, there's the Guild of Music Supervisors, and during COVID, they started doing weekly panels about anything and everything, and they all live on YouTube. And I think that that's a great way to educate yourself on learning how to, use music in picture and not get sued.
And as far as production design goes, it is about being as thoughtful as possible, really thinking about the story that you're trying to tell. Because, I've worked on $200 million projects, and more money does not make for better storytelling, that's for sure. And I've done some, student films that were so thoughtful and so meaningful, where everybody was on the same page. I talked about the creative trinity, with the cinematographer and the director and the production designer, and it's just really making sure that you put the money where it needs to be.
Totally, thanks so much.
Do we have anyone over here? Yeah.
Well, congrats on the show. I mean, it's gotten so much press, and everyone's so excited for season 2. I was just wondering if there's anything that's changing within your world based on the success of having the first season. Like, are there any artists that are proactively reaching out that they want to be featured on the show? Or is there any sort of like spoiler in your area that you can share for the next season?
I finally got to come to Denver.
Yeah.
For music, we're definitely, there are a lot of artists that are very interested in having their songs in the show.
Okay, so no spoilers.
I mean, a spoiler is a spoiler, and we're not giving spoilers. So.
I think there's someone from Showtime with a blow dart that if we start talking about it, they will.
No, I don't. No matter what it is, I don't. Will ever give spoilers. That's no fun.
Yeah, let's over here on the aisle.
Well, welcome to Denver. I wanted to ask about the opening credits, because as a viewer, that made me so uncomfortable. Like, I binged it, but every time it opened again, I was like, ugh, I gotta make it through. So I'm wondering, from your perspective and as a whole, collaborative production, what kind of input, happens, or kind of insights you can give about how those credits come together to really reflect what you guys were trying to do as a whole for the series.
So for music, a lot of shows now just use title cards. And we were just kind of going back and forth about what we were, how we were going to do it, whether we were just going to have like a quick, 15-second song, or whether we were going to have a main title sequence. And I remember at one point we got a deck, and it was like, what is this? It was really bad. But then I think, I don't believe we had it in the first episode. I don't think we had it in the second episode. And, it was kind of like, well, and it was like, do what feels right. Do what serves the narrative, and then edit too. Because some of it would be like, okay, to cut it here and then to go to the main credits, it would just be, super jarring. So we kind of threw out that idea, and then, we used the Tracy Bonham, I think, in 2. We did use just a title card with a needle drop as opposed to 1, I think we used score. I don't remember, this was a very long time ago. This is like 6 months ago. I can't remember what happened last week. But with the with the main title that we ended with, I think it was just so cool when I finally saw it, because it was literally like a 90s music video. It reminded me of Closer. from Nine Inch Nails. And that was so cool. And then, you know, the song, Craig Nana's song, was just, you know, again, it was just so perfect. And it just worked so well. And you know, again, we just kind of decided to, you know, not show it until episode 3.
From an art direction perspective, it's funny. I mean, it relates back to the other question. Title credits are huge right now in the series, and there are companies that do nothing but title credits, and they had talked about putting together a massive budget to do title sequences, and people had pitched some different ideas, and in the end, partly for financial reasons, but partly because it suited the narrative. That's a particular style that they ended up going with, which they came back and shot some scenes for, turned into a 90s music video.
It's got that grungy lo-fi feel. And if you haven't heard the full version of the theme song, you can stream it now. It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think you guys did such a great job capturing the period. Sometimes a period piece, like something set in the 80s, just oozes 80s on like an unrealistic level. And like, you know, it seems like you both like remember like, oh, the 90s is where we are, but the 80s also happened, and so did the 70s. And I always really think that's such a great touch when those details get to be edited down a little bit, and it's just not overflowing with period. The question I have is for on the music side, was there something that you wanted that you weren't able to get? Would you tell us that, or like one that was like a song that was really one that you were hoping for and it just didn't like work out? You told the Enya story, but you ended up getting it.
I think we ended up getting everything. Yeah, we're very lucky on this show because, again, on one of my other shows, the content is pretty dicey. I work on Euphoria also. So it was, you know, but this one we were able to, people were really amenable and excited to have their song. I remember when we first went out for Whole, we were all just like holding our breath, and it turns out that Courtney approves everything herself. She sees the quote request, and she was like, it was conveyed to me that like, she was totally fucking with the show. So I was like, oh, she would. So that was really exciting to get like a personal, you know, approval from Courtney.
That's awesome.
And then for Brian, I think he brings up a great point of the fact that you don't want, if you have a show set in 1996, you don't want everyone driving 93 Camrys. That you want to have that mix of the recent past for that time period too.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a personal direction for me. Is if you notice it, I haven't done my job. You know, my job is to influence you as subtly as possible, and subliminally almost. You know, 90s are they're my era, and my music. Perry Farrell and I were like,
I was so excited when we were able to get that one. My favorite.
But thank you. We were very proud. I had a fantastic team behind me. I had a set decorator who I have worked with quite a bit. We have a shorthand, and we do meticulous research as well into what we're doing.
Do we have any other questions? Let's go over here.
I had a question. So I was wondering, like back when we had a pilot season, and you could see a bunch of pilots, sometimes you'd see the same song and several of them, and you'd wonder if there was something about the music clearance that was easier for that song, or if it was cheaper or something like that. So I was wondering, do you run into that, and do you have to avoid some songs because it seems like everybody's using them? And I was also wondering if your job's a little easier because these artists are selling their rights to bigger music companies that may be more mercenary about selling the permissions.
Yeah, great question. The first part, you know, yeah, we want to kind of stay away from other songs. There's a website called TuneFind, and it has all shows, all seasons, all movies where you can see exactly what songs were in each episode. So I will definitely consult that before I put a song in. When it comes to 90s hip hop, is very difficult. And there's kind of only a handful of songs that can clear on your deadline, especially TV because it's very, very fast. If you have more time, then that's, if you have the luxury of time, then you're good. But
is that because there's samples inside the song that also
correct.
have to be, yeah.
There's split disputes. There's people that own a piece of it that hate each other, and so they're like, I want 50 grand and for my 2%, and that's makes everybody else's price go up. So it just becomes not affordable. As far as a lot of the rights being sold, it's an interesting conversation because it doesn't make anything really easier. I mean, for Bob Dylan, for example, he owned all of his publishing, so we would go to his manager, Jeff, who was absolutely lovely. Now we just have to go to Sony or Universal, I'm spacing. They're going to charge a lot more, which I have had words with them because, I know you need to make your $500 million back that, you just spent on this catalog. But the reason these artists are selling their catalogs is to protect their legacy. And what better way to protect your legacy than to have your songs reach an audience that have no idea who you are? For example, I was doing an interview, and it was a younger journalist who asked about the song by the band INXS, and I was like,
Glad I got that one right.
I was like, no, but meaning that she was very young, and so, but she knows the name of that song now, and it's, you look at TikTok with some of the songs that are in TV shows that, these kids are just listening to and being part of their, what their playlists. So I think it's, I'm optimistic about clearances for the TV shows because we have the younger generation. I mean, just for the hell of it, I was trying to clear a Bob Dylan song, like I was talking about, and they were coming back with an obnoxious price. And I went to my cousins who were like 16, 14, and 10. I was like, do you guys know who Bob Dylan is? They were like, who? And I took a screenshot and I sent it to the publisher, and I was like, you have a built-in audience right here so that these 16-year-olds can hear a song and then dive deep into their catalog. And that's why they sold the catalog in the first place. So I think that's a very excellent question. And, still the artist, a lot of times it still has to go through an approval process. And, is Bob Dylan going to be in a Coca-Cola commercial? I kind of doubt it, but you never know. So I think that
have veto power, even though they don't.
it depends on the deal. I think with Bob right now he does. Bruce Springsteen, obviously, yes, he absolutely does. But then it'll be estates that you work with. So I work with, again, on some other of my shows, we work with a lot of estates. We use a lot of catalog songs, so the approvals have to go through the estates or their lawyers, who are very protective of, how they want the song used.
And I guess to jump off of that, you've also used score from other films and other pre-existing works in some of the shows you've worked on. Which is, it seems like that's another sort of.
Yeah, I mean that was different because it was using a lot of 60s and 70s very obscure French and Italian scores.
But I wonder if that same argument works, that you have a chance to build a much wider audience outside of maybe these individual countries where they might be known. But yeah.
I think so. I mean, I think that happens with every artist and every song because it's so accessible, and because music is just becoming a character in a lot of different shows, that there are artists, whether it's something like In Excess or whether it's, Orville Peck, for example, or Dot Allison in our show, or Ember Marks. So, there's just the exposure element, which I think is really exciting. And again, for Yellowjackets, I mean, I want, Gen X to just go listen to Portishead's records. They're incredible. Listen to Jane's Addiction, because, who's the Jane's Addiction of today? Who's got that, that grit and that rawness? And, I think music is in an interesting place now. But if, in a way, it's like this, like we made our mixtapes, right? We're taking our mixtapes and giving it to you. And when or we know when we got mixtapes, we'd be like, oh my God, I want more. And you go to the store and buy the record. Well, now we're going to give you a song, and then you're going to go on Spotify and start digging into it. You're welcome.
I think we're up against it time-wise, but I guess as a way to close off, is there anything that we sort of haven't talked about season one that you either wanted to highlight, or something you're particularly proud of from this season? If not, that's okay. I wanted to give you the chance to, if you wanted to single something else out.
No, like you mentioned, we did a show that went over a couple of different time periods. We introduced another generation to the 90s, and I thought we did a good job of it.
Yeah, and we're bringing 90s back. I'm not mad at that. Yeah.
I want to catch Tracy Ballman in concert.
Well, and also Boston, so I kind of had an ulterior motive with that. No, we're just really, really proud of the show, and really excited that it caught on and it connected, and people are so excited about it. So thank you guys for watching it.
When is season 2?
Yes.
Sometime
soon.
Yeah.
When season 2 happens.
When it happens, yeah. On the off chance that you're here and you haven't watched the show, obviously it's available through Showtime. But Jen, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk. This was wonderful.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your Tuesday here at SeriesFest.